This is Stephen Levine, CFO of Let's Talk Bitcoin. As someone who pays bills with Bitcoin, I find it immensely satisfying that I can pay our designer in Canada quickly and easily. A couple of button clicks and Bitcoin moves over miles and borders, unfettered by overbearing bureaucracy. It is our goal here at Let's Talk Bitcoin to create structures that allow Bitcoin and all of its descendants to thrive and grow into the safe, free, and fair invention that Satoshi wrote about. In my spare time, I'm also the president of Bitcoin Packaging. BitcoinPackaging.com makes it easy to use your currency of choice to purchase mundane products. We empower you to change the financial world by spending your Bitcoin. When you buy a product from BitcoinPackaging.com with Bitcoin, we will send you a 10% rebate off of the already low prices. BitcoinPackaging.com is a virtual company. We have no warehouse, trucks, or salespeople. Come to our store, take a look around, spend some Bitcoin and tell your friends. BitcoinPackaging.com.
They're actually not even Invictus anymore, right? They're BitShares.
No, they are Invictus. BitShares, they've separated the brands, or at least tried to. I don't know. The messaging is incredibly confusing to me. It's been a very frustrating experience. But no, they are still Invictus.
It's confusing to you, and you know it quite well. It's even more confusing to the rest of us. But I think this demonstrates the thing that Stephanie was talking about, which is the importance of focus. Startups get distracted and get pulled in multiple directions as they take initial customer feedback, or they try to do too much, or they get distracted by things that are not strategic and not core to their function. And that's usually what kills a startup. It's not starvation because they don't have enough things to pursue or enough market opportunities. It's a diffusion of focus and basically trying to take on too much and getting completely overwhelmed.
So once again, I'm kind of just waiting to see what happens with that project. Supposedly we have a release date coming up for a testnet. And again, I just want to see that there's a product here.
You know, another thing that I'm curious how it's going to work out is what are the legal aspects of these things. I know Ethereum's trying really hard to make sure that they don't run afoul of whatever regulators, and I'm sure the other ones are too, but it's an uncharted territory. I'm sure there are going to be some government agents who are going to try to say that whatever, any one of these companies is breaking some laws, whether it's SEC or some other agency or some other country or whatever. I mean, it's a real challenge to figure out how to kind of protect yourself in an environment like that. It's arbitrary.
So the next one that came out chronologically, I think, is Counterparty. But Counterparty, I just talked with Robbie, one of the developers, on episode 109. You can learn a lot about it there. Let's talk about NXT real quick. NXT has kind of always been this wildcard project that had a truly anonymous founder, whereas Counterparty recently had their developers come out and essentially do a road show in Silicon Valley, trying to, raise awareness about the Counterparty project. The NXT guy always spoke through a proxy. At least that's what we're led to understand, because the person who was his proxy was also an anonymous person. For listeners who didn't follow NXT, NXT is a alternative implementation. It was done in Java. It's completely different code from what Bitcoin or any of the other cryptocurrencies that are out there. And it implemented one of the earlier asset exchanges, but it was one of the less featured asset exchanges. So I think that they're adding more functionality to it now. But it's been kind of this interesting thing because they have no philosophical leadership whatsoever. Basically, people are just there. There are no leaders within this space, not even self-appointed leaders, generally speaking. There are people who step up because literally nobody else has done it, but they don't seem terribly well equipped for the job, and they don't even really seem to want to do it. It just seems like they're doing it because, hey, somebody has to do it, and this is a way I can contribute. And this contrasts to a lot of the projects that are out there. Actually, BitShares is an interesting one of them, because BitShares raised money and haven't done too much with it. And so where projects like a project recently went from BitShares to NXT, there was going to be an exchange for BitShares, but because, again, they're having delays and it was hard, they were actually able to go to the NXT community, say, hey, we need this much funding to do this with NXT. And the community itself actually ponied up, invested in the thing, and it's going to happen. So it's been interesting watching the headless nature of this thing. While they don't have any sort of broad strategy, they do have a lot of tactical ability.
Yeah. And actually, very recently, BC Next, who was like the Satoshi of Next, said that he or she was going to disappear and was like walking away, and that their next project would be one that was public and had their name attached to it.
The person completely walked away like a month before that, too.
Was this before Circle opened? And we know what you're up to, Jeremy.
Somehow I doubt that, but anything's possible.
Do we need the disclaimer for that ridiculously wild speculation, or you just let it run?
I think they could tell you were joking. But yeah, I mean, BC Next kind of walked away and said, all right, it's in the community's hands now. If you guys want to do something with this, go ahead, do it. And yeah, that's kind of an interesting approach. We haven't seen that with many other projects.
Well, sure we have. It's the Satoshi approach.
Well, yeah. Okay, sure. Fine. I was thinking projects outside of Bitcoin, but you're right.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like,
yeah, basically.
So that redundancy, you know, again, like it's that we can't all work in a linear fashion in Bitcoin because there's nobody in charge. But here that's even more true because like the core dev team doesn't even want any responsibility. You know, like I feel like the core devs in Bitcoin, they kind of know what they want Bitcoin to be. Like they have an idea of what they think it's going to develop into or what they're going to add to it or what have you. And so, you know, like if someone has an idea that's directly contrary to that, that can cause friction. But the NXT developers really seem like they have no ambitions whatsoever and are mostly scared that their involvement is going to get them in trouble. And so, you know, like one of the primary developers who goes by the name Jean-Luc Picard, where I think he's done a wallet and works on the core code too, has I saw a post from him the other day that basically said that if nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. You know, and like I'm going to develop and there's nothing you can do to make me do anything else.
Right.
That has meant that there actually is a lot of development in NXT, and where, you know, a project like Bitcoin now, I think we have somewhere above 10 wallets. NXT launched with 7, and they have a bunch more in the works too. So there's just all this redundancy that you get by not having anybody, like by not even having anybody who you would want to ask for permission. Like people might want to ask somebody for permission in Bitcoin, but in NXT, who the heck are you going to do that with? There's nobody.
I'd like to announce the launch of the NXT. It's an association that's centralized. They'll come and ask me for permission. It's a very different approach to doing things. It's kind of planned anarchy. It's just deliberate.
That's a big draw for a lot of people,
absolutely.
though.
Of course it is. Now, the question is whether it works and scales, and that, again, is going to be answered by the market.
So, you know, it remains to be seen if indeed it works and scales, but so far it seems to be working. And I mean, like, again, they have a bunch of wallets out there on the main net. You know, people are transacting value. I don't really think there's too much in the way of like commerce or acceptance. And I know that it's been really, this is another interesting part for people who are thinking about making really innovative coins. You should understand that a coin like NXT has a real problem when it comes to getting included on exchanges, simply because it's so different. It's completely different from Bitcoin, which is what all of these exchanges are used to incorporating. So every time they incorporate an alt, they basically just do the same thing they did for Bitcoin with a little bit of different information and run a different thing. But with this, it's totally different.
Yeah, I remember at one point, maybe a couple of months ago, there were a lot of exchanges that were basically processing next withdrawals manually, which caused like a lot of delays, and people were like, well, what's going on here? But, you know, I think we got to give them credit for actually having a distributed exchange, right? That's something that a lot of people talk about, but not many actually have. And even if it's rudimentary, they do have something that kind of works, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, in trying to figure out where I want to build LTB coin, I've looked at all of these options really in depth and worked through, you know, and worked with a variety of the wallet softwares on each one. And just generally speaking, you know, NXT is pretty solid, but it feels stiff. Everything I do with it, like this is like, you know, the difference between an application that feels really good to use and an application that doesn't feel really good to use, a lot of times it's just how responsive it feels. And that's something that I get with a lot of this early stuff is there's no responsiveness whatsoever in it. And a lot of the things that you would intuitively think, like, you know, I could click and drag this, or I could right click on this and bring up, you know, more information about it or something like that, are instead hidden behind really static, you know, like one click menus or something like that, buried stuff. There's a lot of this user experience stuff that still has a long way to go. And I mean, that's another thing I've noticed in the last 6 months is that a lot of people who have a lot of skills on the user experience side are really jumping into Bitcoin, where before it was mostly developers. So yeah, I absolutely think that NXT deserves a lot of credit, and I'm continuing to pay attention to it. It just didn't fit the needs for what we were doing with LTB Coin because it didn't have as full-featured and decentralized asset exchange as ultimately Counterparty, which is who we picked to build LTB Coin on. But it's another funny thing. You said that having an asset exchange is a big deal, and you're totally right. But isn't it hilarious that we went from nobody having an asset exchange to now there being 3 that are working right now and available on Mastercoin, Counterparty, and NXT inside of like 2 months of each other?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of these technologies, people have the same idea and they're racing to get it out. And sometimes it's not just one entity that comes out with a new technology first. Sometimes it's kind of a bunch, like a little bunch of grapes. They all come out at once. Yeah. So yeah, more competition. That's great. People use the one they like best.
Yeah. I mean, that's the core, is that we're solving problems here. The problems don't stop being problems just because someone else is working on a solution for that problem. They stop being problems when they're actually solved. And so, I mean, that's it's referencing back to Andreas's earlier comment. The market is deciding. The market is making these decisions because those are the people who stick around, and those are the solutions that succeed. And those are the solutions that get copied more than anything else.
Yeah, what all of this demonstrates is that Bitcoin opened the door to currency being a choice. And once you open the door to currency being a choice and people start making choices, then you unleash this incredible wave of innovation that was pent up before. And, at first it seems weird because I have to make all these choices. It's not so simple. At least before, I had dollars. That's all. No choice. and I didn't really need to think about what the monetary policy was, or what the decentralization platform was, or how it was tweaked, or how it was operating, where the control line, all of those things we don't need to think about because we don't have a choice. Now we need to think about those, and there's lots of different choices to make, and that can be overwhelming. But out of those choices, you get innovation, you get improvement. And we're seeing a kind of a brave new world where currency is an experimental playground. And even beyond that, consensus blockchain platforms are an experimental playground. And we're going to see a lot of experimentation go on in the next couple of years.
So wrapping this up, if you'd like to learn more about any of the tokens that we talked about, you can find information about Mastercoin at mastercoin.org. You can find information about BitShares at bitshares.org. You can find information about Ethereum at ethereum.org. You can find information about NXT at mynxt.info. And if you'd like to learn more about Counterparty, you can go to counterparty.co. This was definitely not a complete rundown of any of these things. It was more just kind of an update that then, turned into a kind of long and meandering conversation. So I absolutely encourage you to do your own research on all of these things before putting any of your own funds on the line. And also remember that we're kind of acting in our own best interest too. People who are in favor of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies tend to be invested in them. And this is very true, at least for me.
Can we maybe give a little update about LTB Coin?
Yeah, sure.
I wonder if people are wondering about that. Oh, I don't know. I mean, well, I think the audience may want to know, how's it coming? When's it going to come out? And
Let's Talk Bitcoin will be out as soon as we can get it out. We're working very hard to make it a very innovative product. And I think that when people see what we've come up with, it'll be really interesting. All of the basics are there, but there are a lot more specifics, and there are a lot more systems to include everybody. And ultimately to try and improve the quality of content, both on the written side instead of just on the audio side, which is pretty much what I had been building it for too. So ultimately, I hope that the model that we're launching will compete with the Huffington Post, essentially, in that it will allow for users to create their own blog or their own show, and essentially have the audience or the platform be able to curate it up so that it can see the exposure and recognition that it deserves based on the quality of it. And that's hard to do, but I think we've got some good solutions. And it's really just about building tools at this point, because as with all of this stuff, I mean, literally, it's like if you have a car before there are gas stations, I mean, it's useful, but it's not that useful. And so somebody has to build a gas station. So that's basically where we are now, is we're working with people to build gas stations and building gas stations ourselves so that then all this stuff can happen and not be such a manual process.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to do, but I think it's worth doing because it changes the nature of publishing dramatically.
Well, ultimately, this changes the nature of everything. I mean, that's it's that no monopolies thing. You know, I mean, like in a future show, we'll talk about this, but I had an article published with TechCrunch that was pulled from TechCrunch. It was a good article too about MaidSafe because I had a tip widget in it. And so like I had cleared it with my editor at TechCrunch, and like it was no big deal. We had talked about it weeks before, and I was like, hey, I'm going to do this. And it got included in the thing, and it caused this big political kerfluffle within their organization, I guess, because my article got pulled, was never put back up. I was never compensated for it. It was like this thing. But I think it's that was the first instance of an article being pulled for the inclusion of a Bitcoin display widget. So I was pretty happy to have that.
Well, I hope it gets you more publicity than a TechCrunch article could.
Well, that's okay. Like I said, this is all just about the firsts, right? I mean, like in order for there to be a second, there has to be a first. I'm always very happy to be first wherever possible.
What was the big problem with you having a tip widget?
There's a big question about morally, is it okay for readers or an audience to directly compensate the content creators in a system where that's not the way it normally works? The way it normally works is that TechCrunch would have paid me $100 as a freelancer for the article, and that would have been it. But the interesting part is that in the hour that it was up, I received, I think, $2.50 worth of Bitcoin. And so in that hour, from a couple of people giving me like 25 cents on average, I had, like 1/25 of the entire amount that I was going to make from that article. And this was from, it not being up very much, about an incredibly technical topic when very few people actually have Bitcoin that they want to spend like this. So again, I think that the model of connecting content creators directly to their audience and turning the platform, instead of being this enabling thing where it's like a gatekeeper, instead it becomes a utility. And as a utility, you charge much, much, much lower rates because you're a utility. And you have competition because there are other platforms that people can choose to use. So again, that's kind of the core idea here, is that this is something that if it could be stopped, it would be stopped. I mean, anything disruptive that can be stopped will be stopped in the environment that we live in now, simply because disruption comes at the cost of the legacy. And so that's the thing, is that you can't stop this stuff. So whether we're talking about money, whether we're talking about compensation, whether we're talking about employment in general, you can't stop this stuff. And so it's the future. Thanks for listening to episode 112 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for this episode was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Andreas Antonopoulos, and Adam B. Levine. This episode was edited by Adam B. Levine. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens and Calvin Henderson. Any questions or comments? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com.